The strangest part is that it happened before I even knew it was happening. 2 days ago my phone buzzed while I was at work, and by that night everything felt different. It involved my parents. There were exactly 3 rehearsed lines, and somehow they were practicing them on my porch without knowing I was watching. At least that's what I keep telling myself. Because when I first saw the footage, something about it didn't sit right. I'll explain how I got there in a minute. I live alone in a small house I bought about 6 years ago. It's nothing fancy, quiet street. Same neighbors for a long time. I installed a Ring camera after a package went missing, not because I expected anything dramatic to happen. Most days it just records squirrels or delivery drivers looking confused. My relationship with my parents has been strained for a while. Not explosive, just distant. We talk maybe once every couple of months. Short calls, safe topics, work, weather, nothing heavy. No real fights either, which somehow makes the distance feel heavier. The last time I saw them in person was last Thanksgiving. It was polite, a little stiff. We hugged, but it felt practiced, like we were following instructions we'd memorized years ago. After that, nothing much. No visits, no surprise check-ins. Which is why what happened next threw me off. 2 days ago, I got a notification on my phone at 6:18 in the evening. Motion detected, front door. I ignored it at first. I was finishing something up and figured it was another delivery. A few minutes later, another alert. Then another. That's when I opened the app. I saw my parents standing on my porch. They weren't knocking. They were standing close together, facing the door, but their bodies were angled toward each other instead of the house. My dad had his hands folded in front of him. My mom kept adjusting her hair, then stopping, then adjusting it again. They didn't look surprised to be there. They looked prepared. At first I felt that normal spike of panic. Why didn't they call? Was something wrong? Did someone get sick? Then my dad said very clearly, "Okay, one more time." My stomach dropped. My mom sighed and nodded. She said, "We miss you, we've been worried." Then she stopped. They both went quiet. My dad shook his head slightly. "No, that sounded flat, try again." I remember leaning closer to my phone like that would somehow make it make more sense. She tried again. "We miss you, we haven't heard from you in a while." He paused, then said, "Better, but you need to smile at the end." They both looked straight at my door and smiled. Then my dad said his line, "We just wanted to stop by and see how you're doing." He frowned. "No, that sounds like an excuse." They stood there in silence for a few seconds. My mom looked down at the porch floor. My dad rubbed his face. I felt embarrassed watching it, like I was spying on something private, but at the same time, this was my porch, my camera. And they were rehearsing. That's when the math started running in my head. They hadn't spoken to me in weeks. They didn't text before coming. And yet they were practicing what they were going to say, like this was a performance they wanted to get right. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know if I was overreacting. And I didn't answer the door. They rang the bell a minute later, smiled again, and delivered the lines almost exactly the way they'd practiced. I watched it all from my phone. And I didn't stop the recording. I didn't answer the door that night. I stayed at work longer than I needed to, staring at my phone every few minutes like it might explain itself if I looked hard enough. When I finally drove home, the porch was empty. No note, no missed calls. Just the quiet hum of the streetlights and my own footsteps sounding louder than usual. Inside, the house felt off, like it knew something I didn't. I sat on the couch and watched the footage again. Then again. I slowed it down. I turned the sound up. I tried to convince myself it was harmless. Maybe they were nervous, maybe they didn't know how to start the conversation. But the more I watched, the more deliberate it felt. They weren't arguing about what to say. They were refining it. The next morning, my mom texted me. Just one line. "Stopped by yesterday, sorry we missed you." Nothing about worry, nothing about urgency. No mention of why they came without calling. It was written like a polite follow-up to a casual visit, not something they'd practiced on my porch. I stared at the message longer than I should have. I typed back, "Yeah, I was at work. Everything okay?" She replied almost an hour later. "All good, just wanted to see you." That should have been enough. On paper it was normal. Parents dropping by, adult child not home, mild disappointment, end of story, but I couldn't stop thinking about my dad saying, "That sounds like an excuse." An excuse for what? Later that day I checked the camera again. There was another clip I hadn't noticed before. It was short. Recorded about 10 minutes before they arrived. My dad's car pulled up down the street, not directly in front of my house. They sat inside for a bit. The camera didn't catch sound that far, but I could see them talking. My mom held something in her lap. A folded piece of paper. They stayed there for almost 4 minutes before getting out. That's when it hit me. They didn't just show up. They prepared somewhere else first. Then they parked away from the house. Then they rehearsed. Then they rang the bell. I tried to tell myself I was connecting dots that didn't belong together. Still, I couldn't ignore the timing. 3 days earlier, I'd missed a call from my dad. I saw it late that night and figured I'd call back the next day. I didn't. Not on purpose. I just didn't feel like having another shallow conversation that went nowhere. Now I wondered if that missed call mattered more than I thought. That evening, my sister called me. We don't talk often either. Maybe once every few months. Her voice sounded light, almost rehearsed in its own way. "Hey," she said. "Mom and Dad mentioned they stopped by your place." I said, "Yeah, I wasn't home." She paused. Just a beat too long. "They just wanted to check in," she said. "You know how they get." I didn't respond right away because I was trying to remember the last time my parents had ever rehearsed caring. After that call with my sister, I sat in my car for a long time before going inside. The engine was off. The radio was silent. I just sat there replaying her pause in my head. It wasn't dramatic, it was small. But it was there. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the folded paper my mom was holding in the car. I couldn't see what was on it. But I could see how careful she was with it, like she didn't want to crease it the wrong way. That didn't feel like nothing. The next day, I decided to test something, nothing big. I texted my dad. "Hey, saw you called a few days ago, what's up?" He replied almost immediately. That alone was unusual. "Nothing major," he wrote. "Just wanted to see how you're doing." The wording caught my attention. It was almost the same sentence he'd practiced on my porch. I stared at the screen. I felt that same tight feeling in my chest, like when you realize you've been repeating something without knowing why. I didn't call him, I just said, "All good here." He reacted with a thumbs up. That was it. Later that afternoon, I pulled up the footage again. This time, I watched their faces instead of listening to the words. My dad looked focused, almost tense. My mom looked nervous, like she was trying to remember lines before a play. At one point, before the doorbell rang, she asked, "Do you think this is enough?" He nodded. "It has to be." Enough for what? I realized then that whatever they were doing, it wasn't spontaneous, it wasn't emotional. It was planned. That's when I checked my email. There was a message from a law firm I didn't recognize. It had come in the same morning my parents showed up. I'd ignored it because it looked generic. Subject line was just my last name. Inside, it said they were trying to reach me regarding a family matter. No details. Just a phone number and a request to call back. I felt stupid for not seeing it sooner. I didn't call them right away. I sat there holding my phone, feeling like if I dialed the number, something would become real that I wasn't ready for yet. Instead, I checked the camera one more time. There was nothing new. Just the empty porch. The same doormat. The same quiet. But now it felt staged, too. I realized I wasn't confused anymore. I was suspicious. And once that feeling settled in, it didn't go away. I waited 2 days before calling the law firm. Not because I forgot. I thought about it constantly. I just needed time to sit with the idea that something might be happening without my consent. That sounds dramatic, but that's honestly how it felt. Like people were moving pieces around while I was still staring at the board. When I finally called, a receptionist answered and transferred me to a man named Andrew. His voice was calm, professional, the kind of calm that makes you feel like you're already late to something. He said they had been trying to reach me regarding a family trust. I asked him to slow down. He apologized and said he should not assume anything. Then he said my parents had contacted their office about updating documents. Nothing final yet, just discussions. He used the word preliminary more than once. I asked why I needed to be involved. There was a pause. He said my name appeared in the documents, and legally they needed confirmation of contact. That was it. No accusations, no urgency. Just information. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the wall. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I was trying to line up the timing, the missed call from my dad, the visit without warning, the rehearsed lines, the careful smiles, the folded paper in the car. It all fit together too neatly. That night my mom called me. She didn't mention the law firm. She asked how work was going. She asked if I was eating enough. She said she missed me. She said it the same way she practiced. I didn't call her out on it. I just listened. A few minutes in, she said, "Your father and I were thinking maybe we should all sit down together soon." I asked why. She said just to talk. That phrase again. Too clean, too vague. I told her I was busy this week. That was true. It was also a shield. After we hung up, I checked the Ring app again. I don't know why. I guess I wanted proof that I wasn't imagining things. that this hadn't been some one-time weird moment, there was nothing new. But the absence felt loud. The next morning my sister texted me. She asked if I'd spoken to Mom. When I said yes, she replied with a smile emoji and nothing else. That's when I realized something else. No one was lying to me outright. They were just choosing their words carefully. I started paying attention to details I'd ignored before. How my dad always deflected questions about plans. How my mom filled silence with reassurance. How my sister checked in only after my parents did. It felt coordinated. Not malicious, just organized. And that might have bothered me more. I didn't want confrontation. I didn't want answers yet. What I wanted was space to understand what I was actually reacting to. Because if they were preparing something, I needed to decide whether I was part of it or just a name on a page. I didn't reach out again. I waited. The waiting changed how I heard everything. Every message felt measured. Every pause felt intentional. I started noticing how often people say nothing when they could say something small. That silence began to feel like its own answer. 2 days later, my dad called again. I let it ring, not out of spite. I just wasn't ready to hear another version of the same sentence delivered in a calm voice. I knew if I answered, he would say he was just checking in. And I didn't trust myself not to hear the rehearsal behind it. He left a voicemail. It was short. He said my name. He said he hoped I was well. He said we should talk when I had time, nothing wrong with it. That was the problem. That evening I finally replied to the law firm email. I asked if they could clarify what kind of trust they were referring to. I kept it neutral. No emotion, just a request for information. Andrew replied the next morning. He said he couldn't discuss specifics without a meeting. He said my parents were still reviewing options. He said my involvement did not require immediate action. Then he added one line at the end. Your parents expressed concern about timing. Concern about timing. I read that sentence over and over. That was the first time anyone had admitted there was a clock running. I went back to the ring footage again. I watched the moment right before they rang the bell. My mom took a breath. My dad nodded once. Like a cue. I realized they weren't rehearsing emotion, they were rehearsing restraint. That afternoon, my sister called again. This time she didn't ease into it. Are you okay? She asked. I said yes. She hesitated. Then she said, Mom's just worried you're pulling away. I wanted to ask who told her that. Instead, I asked, worried about what? She said, about everything. That word, everything. It didn't explain anything, it just filled space. I didn't push. I told her I needed time. She said she understood, but her voice didn't sound convinced. After we hung up, I sat in my living room with all the lights off. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I felt alert, like something had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. It occurred to me that my parents hadn't asked me what I wanted. They hadn't asked how I felt. They had only practiced what they wanted to say. That night, I made a decision. If there was going to be a conversation, it wouldn't happen on my porch, and it wouldn't happen on their timeline. I sent one message, to both my parents. I know you've been talking to a lawyer. If we're going to talk, I want it to be clear and honest, not rehearsed. I didn't add anything else. I didn't know how they would take it. But for the first time since the camera alert, I felt steady. They didn't respond right away. That was new. Normally, even if the reply was vague, it came quickly. This time there was nothing. No acknowledgement, no reassurance. Just silence sitting there, heavier than anything they'd said so far. I checked my phone more than I want to admit. An hour passed. Then 2, that's when I started wondering if I'd said too much, or worse, if I'd finally said the thing they couldn't work around. Late that night, my mom replied, I'm sorry if it felt that way. We just didn't want to say the wrong thing. I read it slowly. She didn't deny it was rehearsed. She just reframed it. I didn't answer. The next day, Andrew from the law firm called me directly. I almost didn't pick up, but something told me this wasn't optional anymore. He said my parents had scheduled a review meeting for the following week. He said no documents were finalized. He said again that my role was still undefined. Then he said something that changed the tone. They asked whether you'd be attending. I asked him why that mattered if my role was undefined. There was a pause, not a long one, but long enough. He said, because certain options assume your presence. Assume. I told him I hadn't agreed to anything. He said he understood. He sounded like someone who understood professionally, not personally. After the call, I went for a walk. No destination, just movement. I kept thinking about how many assumptions had already been made without me in the room. That afternoon, my dad finally replied to my message. We weren't trying to hide anything, he wrote. We just wanted to get it right. Get what right? I typed out 3 different responses. Deleted all of them. What I sent instead was simple. Then talk to me, not around me. He didn't respond. That evening my sister showed up at my house. No call, no text, just a knock. I froze when I heard it. For a split second I thought it might be my parents again, practicing something new. When I saw her through the window, my shoulders dropped a little. She looked uncomfortable, like she hadn't planned this but felt pushed into it. We sat at the kitchen table. She kept her hands folded. Same posture as my dad. She said, "They're scared. You're going to misunderstand everything." I asked her what everything was. She exhaled and said, "I don't think I'm supposed to say." That was the clearest answer I'd gotten so far. I told her I wasn't angry. I told her I just wanted honesty. She nodded, but her eyes didn't meet mine. Before she left, she said one last thing. They didn't expect the camera. That sentence stayed with me long after she walked out, because neither did I, and now it was the only reason I knew the difference between concern and preparation. After my sister left, I didn't check the camera for a while, not because I forgot about it, more like I didn't want to see anything else that confirmed what I was already thinking. Once you see behind the curtain, you can't unsee it, and I needed a day or two where my parents were just my parents again, not people managing optics. That didn't last long. The next morning, Andrew emailed me again. Short message, polite. He said the meeting was confirmed for Friday at 10 a.m. He said my parents hoped I could attend, in person if possible. He added the address. It was their house. That detail mattered more than I expected. If this was just paperwork, we could have met anywhere. Office, video call, neutral space. But they wanted it at their place, their ground, their rules. That told me more than anything else in the email. I didn't reply right away. I went to work. I sat through meetings. I answered emails. I did everything on autopilot, while my brain stayed fixed on one question. What exactly were they afraid I would misunderstand? That evening, my mom called again. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me was tired of waiting. She sounded careful. Not upset, not warm either. Just controlled. She said, "We really hope you'll come on Friday." I asked her why it had to be there. She said, "It's just easier." I asked what we were talking about. She paused, then said, "It's about the future." That phrase felt rehearsed too. I told her I needed to know what kind of conversation I was walking into. I said I didn't want surprises. My voice stayed calm, but my hands were shaking. She said, "We don't want surprises either." That was the moment I realized we were talking past each other. I said I'd think about it. After we hung up, I finally checked the Ring app again. There was a new clip from earlier that afternoon. My parents' car pulled up. They didn't get out. They sat there for a minute. Then my dad stepped onto the porch alone. He stood exactly where he had before. Same spot, same posture. He looked at the door. He didn't say anything. Then he walked back to the car and they left. No rehearsal this time. No lines, just confirmation. That night I barely slept. I kept imagining walking into their house on Friday and feeling like I'd already missed half the conversation, like the decisions had been outlined, and I was just there to initial the margins. By morning, I knew one thing for sure. If I went, it wouldn't be as a guest. It would be as someone who wanted clarity, not comfort. I emailed Andrew back. I told him I would attend, but I asked for one thing. I said I wanted all documents discussed to be shared with me beforehand. He replied an hour later. Understood. That word again. I didn't know what Friday would bring, but I knew I wasn't going to pretend anymore. The documents arrived the next morning, not all of them, just enough to outline the shape of things, a trust, amendments, timelines, language that sounded neutral until you read it twice. Then you noticed how carefully every sentence avoided saying who actually decided what. I printed them out and spread them across my kitchen table. That's when I saw my name. Not buried, not highlighted, just there, repeated in a way that made it clear I wasn't an afterthought. I was a variable. Something to be accounted for. I kept thinking about my parents on the porch, about how they practiced warmth without letting it spill over into honesty. Reading those pages felt like the same thing, just in legal form. That afternoon my sister texted me again. "Are you going on Friday?" I said yes. She took a few minutes to reply, then she said, "Okay, just listen first." That sentence landed heavier than she probably meant it to. Listen first. Not ask, not respond, just absorb. I didn't reply. Friday came faster than I expected. I drove over early mostly because I didn't want to arrive late and feel like I was already behind. Their house looked the same, neat, familiar, lawn trimmed, curtains open, everything visible was calm. My dad opened the door. He smiled. A real one this time, I think. Or maybe I just wanted it to be real. My mom hugged me. It lasted a second too long, like she was bracing herself. We sat in the living room. Andrew arrived a few minutes later. He set his briefcase down carefully, like placement mattered. The conversation started light, small talk, weather, traffic. I let it happen. I listened. Then Andrew shifted his tone. He began explaining what I'd already read, the purpose of the trust, the reasons for the changes. He spoke in general terms like this was standard procedure and not something that had required porch rehearsals. I waited. Eventually he turned to me. He asked how I felt about the proposed structure. That was the first time anyone had asked me that directly. I told him I needed clarification on one section. The part about decision authority. The wording was vague, intentionally vague. My parents exchanged a look. My mom said we thought that part was clear. I said it wasn't. Not to me. The room got quiet, not tense. Just still. Andrew stepped in and explained it again, slower this time. He said certain decisions would be made by trustees. He said my parents would retain control for now. He said future adjustments were possible. Possible. I asked who the trustees were. Another pause. My dad cleared his throat. He said my sister's name. I didn't react. Not outwardly. I just nodded like I'd expected it. Because somewhere along the way I didn't interrupt when he said her name. I just sat there and let it land. My sister looked down at her hands. She didn't look surprised. That hurt more than anything else in the room. It told me this wasn't new information for her. It was just new for me. Andrew kept talking, filling the silence with explanations. He said trusteeship didn't mean ownership. He said it was about continuity, about avoiding conflict later. He said my parents wanted stability. I listened. I really did, but all I could think about was the porch. About how carefully they practiced saying they missed me. About how none of that care showed up in the paperwork until it needed to. I asked one last question. I asked what would happen if I disagreed with a future decision. Andrew answered honestly. He said there would be processes, reviews. But ultimately trustees had discretion. Discretion. I looked at my parents then. Not angrily, just directly. I asked them why they hadn't told me sooner. My mom said they didn't want to stress me out. My dad said they thought it would be easier explained in person. Both answers sounded reasonable. Both avoided the real issue. They decided first, then they practiced. I told them I wasn't signing anything that day. Andrew nodded like he expected that. He said that was fine. He said we could revisit things later. On the drive home, I felt oddly calm, not relieved, not resolved, just clear. That night, I watched the ring footage one last time, not to analyze it, just to see it as it was. Two people standing on a porch choosing words instead of honesty. I realized something important then. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were trying to manage me, and I couldn't unknow that. I emailed Andrew the next morning. I told him I wanted my own legal counsel involved moving forward. He replied professionally. No pushback, just acknowledgement. My parents didn't call that day. Or a week later, my mom texted me and asked if I wanted to come over for dinner. No mention of trusts. No mention of lawyers. Just dinner. I said no. Not forever. Just no. Because for the first time, I understood the difference between being included and being accounted for, and I wasn't willing to confuse the two anymore.